Hey, ujambo mwanadamu mtukufu, ujambo rafiki, ujambo mwanadamu uliyeumbwa kwa umbo takatifu, umeumbwa bila itilafu yoyote. Hey, welcome to my podcast number 43, 43. It's good to be here. It's good to say Happy Labor's Day. Fanya kazi kwa bidii, work hard, man. You never know how you're changing the world, how you're touching people. You'll be rewarded one way or another. So never say you are not doing anything. You are doing something. The fact that you're alive, you're doing something. There's nothing to say about labor that is not rewarding. If you, whatever you're doing, whatever you touch, whatever you say, is being recorded in the universe. And I hope your Labor Day in these sides of the world, this side of the continent, was great to me. I took my labor on a little run. It's been showering, it's been drizzling, it's cloudy. The fall season is upon us. So it's time to really say, wow, it's cooling down. And so that's why you see me in a jacket, just keeping it real. So it's good to be here. I got a little bit of a viewer or somebody who cares about what I put on the podcast says, oh, what is that? Pendo la ufa, pendo la riadha, pendo whatever. I have not come up with a podcast name. I remember being vulnerable and saying, oh, I'm flexible. I'm still listening to your input. If anybody has anything to say about the name, I'll give you that, what I call democratic right. Anyway, Pendo La Riadha, Love for Athletics. It's me, Joel Chesimet. Welcome to my sectum. Welcome to my ecosystem. Welcome to my sanctuary, a place of healing and a place of sharing love and kindness and grace and empathy and all of the above. I like to do this. I feel free. I feel liberated. It's good to be here. And for today, I'll introduce to you two heroes, two incredible human beings. Two, the Kenya Pride, the super Kenya Pride that have walked the continent of Africa, maybe even the world, and they've touched people in special ways. The ethos of Ngugis. The ethos of Ngugis. Those are my heroes today as I reflect on what I've been thinking about. I've been marinating on it, contemplating, meditating on it, and here they come, the ethos of Ngugis. Ngugi wa Thiong'o and John Ngugi Kamau. One is a literarist, a novelist, emeritus professor, politician, what I call him, I'll have all kind of names for him. He's a giant among literalists in the world. That's my analysis or my kudos to him. He's a professor. He's been a professor in many universities in the West. He was a local professor at one point in Kenya. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the emeritus professor, is a novelist, he's a playwright. I don't think there's anything he hasn't done when it comes to writing. I'll just leave it at that. You can read about him. But I'm introducing to you, or submitting it to you, this Ngugi wa Thiong'o person. At the same time, I have an athlete, of course. John Ngugi Kamau, legend, 5 times world cross-country champion, gold medalist. I'll get to that. But let's find out, what have they done? What is their body of work? But before I get there, I'll give you my personal admiration and my personal inspiration, how they've affected me, they impacted me as a human being, as a young man growing up in Kenya. Because we always have mentors, people we call heroes. For me, Ngugi wa Thiong'o is not just an ordinary human being, a novelist, a literarist, a writer, a playwright. He's a hero. And let me tell you why. So, growing up, I've always seen myself as a curious human being. I've loved radical ways of looking at things. I think at a very young age, my curiosity was just always there. I'm always asking questions, always getting into trouble asking questions. It's part of how I grew up within family, in schools, and even in some settings. So that's how I grew up. My curiosity takes me to different places. I become very restless within my circle of influence. I can see this growing up. I've always wondered why there's limitations. Why are women being circumcised? I think to me, at a very early age, I saw that as an abomination. It is still an abomination. FGM to me is the lowest form of indignity. Is injust. Is to me. I don't know how to call it, but I'll leave it at that. At a very young age, I remember girls screaming because of the whole process. It bothered me at a very deeper level, and so I'm saying this because it is those injustice that I grew up being a little bit curious and thinking of why and asking why. Maybe it was my own traumas as a child, but this background informs me a lot as I grew up and I became somebody who could ask questions sometimes just walk through life and ask why, or just watch things in like a with an eye of this is not right and this is not the way things should be done. I call it the tradition of nonsense and madness and hypnotic traditions that have kind of scarred people and make people not to be able to see things different. So that's me. And so when I went to high school, I went to a missionary high school, and in this environment, they promoted the values of Christianity, which you know where I'm going with this. It was you only read the Bible and everything that has to do with religion, and there's nothing else you can read. If you are found with a novel, they confiscated it or you got into trouble with it. There was no radio, there was no television. So you live in this world of this is how you get to the next world. If there's anything look like this, if this, some people have always said, "Is heaven look like what I went to high school?" I would rather not go to that heaven. Some of us felt that way at one point, but I'm not really saying it was a bad thing per se, because I think it was this environment that challenged the inner values that I've always said liberated me. So I remember even back then in high school, whereby people would sneak in because they check your bags when you open school, and if you have a novel, you don't have anything that's it's not a Bible, so to speak. They confiscate us, and then they give you at the end of the term, and then you could take it back home. But I remember some people are able to sneak in radios. They could sneak in novels, and I think the one that I remember very vividly or just comes to head is James Hadley Chase. That was a novel, man. Romantic killings, murder, nakedness. You got this young dude looking at all that stuff. It's like, whoa, I'm living in a small world. I'm so contained. I need to be liberated. I need to be express myself, because those characters in the novels kind of transform your mind, or it takes your mind to see different things. I remember too, there's a book by David Mailu. Can anybody correct me there? Is it David Mailu? He was a Mukamba, some guy from Ukambani. He had a novel that was let me put it this way, it warmed your heart and other parts of the body. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I don't know whether I got the name correctly, but I remember I read this book more than once, more than twice. I think I read it more than 3 times, because when somebody had that novel, I remember people ripped it apart. It was worn out by the end of the term because people were curious. There's this idea of people wanted to know more than what we were being taught. And so it is this environment for me that radicalizes me. And I became restless at a very early age in literature, readings, because trust me, the Bible by itself, the whole Bible is a novel. It is a book written for people who want to think, and thinking the Bible will allow you. but sometimes it is not articulated in the right way. It is thou shalt not, and there's this idea of no, no, no environment that has been created within the Bible. It's a framework. To me, it's a manuscript. Is the book that is it's still a bestseller, by the way. But the way the book comes to some of us at an early age is a book of condemnation, a book of making you make smaller. You cannot ask any question. They're going to bang it on your head. So when literature, to me, becomes an avenue, becomes a gateway to finding out more about life, I gravitated towards that. That when I went to high school, I was in a missionary school that was it was a controlled environment. Everything was picked on. No radio, as I said, no television. You are kind of, if you found a radio, it's as if you found an iPad or an iPhone. So when I went to high school, 2-year high school, because we had 4 years in secondary school, then you go to high school. I wanted to do literature. I wanted to do literature, whether it was local literature, Kenyan literature, or African literature. Chinua Achebe was a big name. Chinua Achebe is a late Nigerian who I think is a Nobel Prize winner. And so I wanted to do literature in high school. And so when I went to high school, I don't know why, but Ngugi wa Thiong'o was an icon. He's been an icon, he's still an icon, he's a big household name in Kenya. I think if you talk of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you're talking of a giant. He's a giant among novelists, playwrights, writers across Africa right now. I'm not making that up. You can find out for yourself. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book, The Grain of Wheat, The River Between, Weep Not Child. The other one was the book he wrote that was translated into 100 dialects in maybe the continent or beyond. Something about why do men walk tall? Something like that. Human beings in say, why do we walk like that? I think it has very interesting, it chimes into the Western. It is always one thing about Ngugi wa Thiong'o that's kind of, I wanted to know more about his novels and read more, was that he spoke against the grain. He was a guy who swam upstream. He always swam. His novels are always challenging the status quo, the Western world, the colonial mentality. And in fact, The Whip, Not My Child, is a very interesting novel by itself. The River Between. The River Between became, to me at a young age, and a group of us who are very into reading, we saw the River Between as we sexualize it. River Between, if you know what I'm saying. But I remember getting hold of the book, but I don't think it was my book, because at one point when I went to high school, I discovered that Ngugi wa Thiong'o's literature, his old work that he had wrote and put in public arena for people to use in schools and even university, were banned because the leaders and the regime back then saw his radical ideas as a threat to the status quo. Some of his books that he writes are very anti-colonial enterprise and systems. It is very challenging to the elites that took over, because I've said this over and over. The colonials never left Kenya. They just passed on the baton to the elites that maintained and used a template of colonial system to suppress and oppress. And they've done this to this day. I don't think Kenyans have been liberated. I think we have a flag. I see there, but I've said this, we struggle really coming in terms of the fact that most people in Kenya are still under the yoke. So, and I think his books are very radical. It's a kind of a pushback. It's challenging the status quo. It's speaking to the evils and the plunder and the system that oppresses and puts people down and elevates a few who can sit on them and suppress them. And if you read some of his novels, they're quite incredible books. I read them later during I read some of his books like Grain of Wheat and Weep Not Child, and they really speak to the locals. They speak to the modern local Kenyan nationalism and the idea of who Kenyans were supposed to be. But the regime, the authoritarian regime of that time, saw him as a threat. He was a professor at Nairobi University. They banned his book. They banned his play. There's a play. I'll bring this. Gaikia. I think is that the one? Gaika. Something like that. Gaika. Deda. Gaikia Deda. Is this how it goes in? I don't know. I'm not a pure Kikuyu, but I work so hard. I'm a lover of Kikuyus. I lived in their land. They have a dialect. They have something I just like speaking it out. Gaika Deda. In other words, I'll marry when I want. That's very radical in Kenya, because most marriages sometimes is getting better or arranged, and women were shipped to these families, and dowry was. In fact, talking of that, Wahome Mutai, who was a satirist, newspaper writer in Kenya, he passed away back in the days. I remember every Sunday when my dad brought a newspaper home, I'll read. He had a nickname, Whispers, Wahome Mutai, and I'm speaking to the dowry aspect. He always called his daughters investments. He called them pretty much 401k, because the system, as you know, the African system, in some traditional African system, women are property. You, the father or the family on this side, get your dowry. It's your investment. But yes, satire is an incredible writer. I miss that guy. May he rest in peace. Wahome Mutai, Whispers. So it is these traditions, it is this climate, it is this way of life that Ngugi wa Thiong'o is speaking to. And his play, Gaikia Deda, was a playwright, was very, very popular. I think it was so popular, and anything that was popular was a threat to those despots of that time. Literature that was seen as such had to be shut down, blacklisted, and went underground. And some of us found these books in an underground environment, because they were not sold in the store. They were not sold in the bookstores, because they've been banned. So when I go to high school, and my curiosity and my literature pursuit, I wanted to be local a little bit of get a taste of what are the local writers having to offer as far as literature is concerned. But there was no Kenyan literature when I went to high school. They've been banned, and the biggest loser here, the victim of this regime, was Ngugi wa Thiong'o. As I say, he was a professor at Nairobi University. They arrested him. I think he was in prison for a year, and then they released him. But I don't think he was allowed to teach. His books, of course, were out of the market. And I think he took off. He went in exile to US. He came to US. He went to Berkeley, California, where he became a professor for many years. For a long time, we lost that break. We lost an asset we've never recovered as a country. When you lose literature, when you lose that book, when you lose that person, the country can pretty much never recover. And we've never recovered. We are trying to reinvent ourselves. I think there's a comeback. There's a renaissance. This is a idea, because Ngugi is back in Kenya, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and he's trying to reinvent the wheel of traditionalism. The idea that we can be Kenyans and still be global. And I think when I go to high school, let me go back to my high school, as I was trying to pursue literature, I wanted to see something local, but there was none, so to speak. There was none inside, because the only thing we had back then that spoke to the literature war that was close to what I wanted to see was Alex Laguma, Fog of the Season's End. Now I found that one. It was a book that spoke about Steve Biko, the student leader against apartheid and the oppression of the apartheid system in South Africa. Steve Biko, he was the man before the Mandela. I think he was a student leader who got assassinated and killed by the regime. That novel by Alex Laguma, Fog of the Season's End, to me, I got to tell you what is right here. I remember reading that book like it's a Bible. The other book that I remember in high school that I read was Untouchables. It's an Indian novelist that talked about the caste system in India. The untouchables were the no people, the homeless, so to speak. And then there's high caste, and there's no movement from the top down. I think there's a move. You can move from the top down, but you can. There's no uppity. There's no upward movement in the caste system in India. I don't know whether it's still the same here. But I remember reading that novel in high school. Did a little in-depth thematic looking at how the author was trying to give us that narrative. The other one I did was Hard Times with Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, if some of you know what is it, The Tale of Two Cities, I think it's Charles Dickens. I did that, and guess what? We we could even we appreciated the British literature more than we can appreciate Ngugi wa Thiong'o or the local. How bizarre is that? So I did that book. I think it's a book that speaks about the fight of the worker. Happy Labour's Day. The Fight of the Worker, Charles Dickens. Hard Times is a book that pretty much talks about labor and the labor unions and all that. I did that book. In fact, I remember that book was really hard to read because the English was very interesting. But I read that book. I remember I could even know the pages. I wanted to read. I was a curious reader, and I wanted to know. I was trying to be good at that. The other one I did was some Caribbean. We did some Caribbean books, but I don't think I went too much Caribbean. So we were allowed to see that in schools, but nothing local. So we missed out on Ngugi wa Thiong'o during my time, and we missed a gem. We missed somebody that was incredibly invested in the country. He had an interest. He loved his country. He wrote for the country, spoke for the local people. He pushed back on Christianity and the way it came and kind of, what do you call, wiped out, pretty much. It's like he's taking a disk and putting in the hard drive and wiping out everything. Christianity and colonials did that. They just put us in the machine and put delete. And the delete button was that, never speak your mother tongue again. Never speak your mother tongue. We're going to bite that. I have a feeling they cut our tongues off if you spoke your mother tongue. And it's real because when I was in primary school, they did something that was very dehumanizing. I think it's traumatized me. And I speak this because they used to have something you wear on your neck if you were caught speaking your mother tongue. They call it, I don't remember. Somebody can comment on that. If you are caught speaking your mother tongue, they made you wear something on your neck. It looked like a shame thing. So you're walking down there in school. People know, look at him, aliongea, look at mamake, mwangalie. So there's this mocking and this idea of shaming you for speaking your mother. Your own language was a shame in schools. I'm not making this thing up. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is why I love this guy. He says, enough of this madness. We need to speak our language. And I remember I got caught one time with this thing on my neck at the end. So if you are caught at the end of the school period, which was 4 o'clock, they parade you. So there's a parade. All the students gather before they go home. And if you have the necklace, you stand there and people, you almost like you have fingers pointing at you. Look at you backward. What do you call it? What is it? Backward. What is it? They used to call you nincompoop. I remember a deputy speaker, a deputy headmaster, we call you nincompoop. Why do you speak your mother's tongue language? So you're kind of much exposed as like this. You guys, I don't know whether you relate to this, but I'm talking from experience, and that's why these guys are my heroes. You are ashamed for speaking your dialect in school because they're trying to brainwash you and say English is a supreme language, is a civilized language. Go figure that. If you think, talk of even the natives here can talk about how Christianity was poured down like a bleach down their throats. And I speak to this because Ngugi wa Thiong'o books is a pushback. It is the idea that no, you need to embrace us as we are. And so when I come to high school, these books are nowhere to be seen. As I say, we get foreign books. We gave them some from Britain to reinforce the colonial mentality and how they are better than us in writing. But yet Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the local organic author, was silenced, imprisoned, and exiled. And yet he has made a comeback. I talk to this because I think we lost out. There's a period, there's decades we've lost out, and I think as a country we've suffered a great deal, that we've lost generation and generations of intellectuals and brain drain because of leadership that was not tolerant, that was promoting the Western thinking and the Western civilization at the cost of the locals. And I hope we've come to a place where we can embrace both. And globalization is not helping either, because now we have Chinese in Kenya, we have German, we have French, we are, in fact, even now as I speak, people still look down at people who speak their own language. Wewe mshamba wewe, wewe hujui kuongea lugha ya walioendelea. You know, this idea ya majuu. So there's this idea of, if you speaking Western, you've arrived. And that is a very, is a template from the colonials. You're backward, dark continent, uncivilized people, barbaric. You need English to be civilized. John Ngugi, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's books is a pushback. Is the biggest pushback that I hope I was hoping during my time in high school that I've gotten to read them. But yet I have this time to give him kudos and love, because I'm just being somebody who admire people push back on what people think is what needs to be something that, you know, I've always admired people who go against the regime, against the grain. And I think Ngugi wa Thiong'o stands out to me. And then there's a John Ngugi Kamau, an athlete. I've just finished with a literalist, a playwright, a novelist, a politician, a traditionalist. I forgot to mention something about John Ngugi. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. At one point, I think he unsubscribes to the Western mentality completely and changes his name from, I think it was Kamau Ngugi or John Ngugi, something like that. And he goes by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And it was that change that was he talks of it liberating. He was almost, he was saved again, so to speak. And I think since the 90s or some period after he changed his name, he predominantly writes in Kikuyu. I think that's the only way he writes. He doesn't write in English. His books are written in Kikuyu. And and I wonder of this market, sometimes you say, if you write in local language, what is your market span, or what is your market? How far can you go with Kikuyu? But I think for him he would rather sacrifice that to kind of save a people, and that is quite what the Bible talks about, really. and that's why I think you can always find those radical people, and he's one of those. He stands out in the novel world, in the literary world, as somebody who stands for something. And so let me go to John Ngugi, the athlete, because John Ngugi, the athlete, he is from Nyahururu. He finds his footing there. He finds his family there. He talks of himself going to school, back and forth. He doesn't even know he's an athlete until somebody discovered him in primary school during these inter-high school competitions. They were very intense, man. You think track and field here is intense. Back then, I remember schools could compete in these grass fields, and then they put maybe markings that put lanes. They kind of they put some cuttings on the grass to make lanes, and you're running on the grass for maybe 800 meters, 5,000 meters. It's all grass. And I did my first race in Kenya in 1989. I remember this. I don't know the date. Barefoot on grass, won my 800. I don't know what time I ran. I won it right there next to my house where I lived in Kenya. And so that's how John Ngugi grew up. Most athletes grow up barefoot, and he comes of age. I think at one point he races in some of those local inter stuff, and I think they give you the prize. Sometimes you get a blanket, which was, I tell you get a blanket back then. That's a lot of stuff for you. You bring it home, have a good night, or you get a karai. It's like a big bowl. Where you can wash your clothes, you can pour in water and wash yourself and all that. It's karai. He talks of winning all that and kind of motivated me. He kind of saw himself as an athlete. He didn't even see himself back then, because all he did was back and forth to school. 12 kilometers he talks about. And so I'm talking of John Ngugi here as an athlete after talking of the novelist. He talks of a moment whereby he came to compete in Nairobi, in Ngong Racecourse. Ngong Racecourse is somewhere outside Nairobi, and I raced there in 1990, I think, in a cross-country race, 12 kilometers, which is about 8 miles. I was last. I remember that. And that's my first race I was there. Do you know why? I wasn't prepared for it at all. I just showed up. I was running for Kenya Power, and it is a brutal course. People are just flying by me. I was like, hey, I started well, but I faded badly. So John Gu came there and he won the race there for the first time. And they did. One thing about these races in Kenya is that they're always recruiting. Either companies are recruiting. Kenya Power was doing that back then. Kenya Post Office could recruit you, become their employee, and you become their face. But he got recruited by the military. And the military has been, to be honest with you, Kenya military, I got to tell you one thing. You can talk about Kenya police, but Kenya military has been a special place for athletes. John Ngugi joins them. And I think America has found that too, that military can be a place where athletes, some Kenyan athletes have been running for Kenya, American military. I think there's some I saw in the Olympics. They have the army thing. And Kenya was ahead. They've been ahead on that one. And so John Ngugi joined, and I think they recruited him, which they did back then. They still do it to this day. They find athletes who are like, they don't have a place to go. Some of them can't afford going to college. So they bring them in, they enroll them as military, potential military people, and then they train them. And John Ngugi joined them, and I think he talks of a major who saw his talent and started supporting him financially, not financially, food-wise. Let me tell you something. When it comes to food and nutrition and running, there's no compromise. I remember when I was in Nairobi, sometimes because of hardship, we would race, we would train in Nyayo Stadium, which is the stadium back then. And sometimes I didn't have money for food to refill my system. And I had to walk all the way to Langata or Tiende. I'll talk about that one time. I think it's a very touchy area. It's a very interesting how I came of age to be an athlete, because I learned a lot about nutrition. Because you could train, but if you don't have refill and refueling system, the next day you have nothing to give. And John Ngugi and this major, he talks about supporting him with nutrition. He talks of having meat and milk. If you have those in an athlete, you can go a long way. So John Ngugi joins the military. He starts to find training, because when you join the military as an athlete, they allow you a lot of time to train. And I think the only work they give them is light work. It may be gatekeeper. They train them as military, yes, but mostly they are doing lighter work because they have a lot of work, which is training and competing. So I think that was good environment for him, he says. And at one point, I think he was chosen to go represent Kenya in the All African Games, where he won. And I think winning in Kenya at that time, I remember the newspapers were just flashing with it. Nation, Standard, Kenya Times. Don't talk about Kenya Times on this podcast. I did mention them. Those were the printing propaganda of the regime back then. Oh gosh, I get angry. Kenya Broadcasting Corporation was a mouthpiece of propaganda, but sometimes it helped us football players. It kind of gave us an outside look of how things were, but for most part, it was the Fox News, okay? If you know what I mean. It was propaganda after propaganda. Anyway, so I heard about John Ngugi, his excellence, his success outside in all Africa Games, and then he comes back, he becomes the big name in track and field, and mostly cross-country. 1986, John Ngugi goes to Switzerland for the World Cross-Country Championship. He wins his first cross-country race in the world. And by the way, those were different nations, like the Olympics, but it's cross-country. It's a small setting, but it's still global. And I tell you what, he was never the same, because he comes back, he wins it again. I think the next year it was in some European country, I don't remember. 87, 88, and 89. It was back to back to back. You hear John Ngugi. He was like a household name. One thing about him I'll describe to you. He's a tall guy. If you've watched Timothy Cheruiyot, the 1500-meter runner, he's this guy who leans forward. He has a lot of legs and he's leaning forward and you think he's not moving. But John Ngugi is the same way he was. He had this lanky look. He's a tall guy and he has a lean towards the forward, which helps gravity and helps you. But he had the power of the movement. He's lanky. You think he's slow. He doesn't have that quick, sprint. So John Ngugi wins cross country 4 years in a row, 86 all the way to 89. I forgot to mention something before 89. We go to South Korea. What does John Ngugi do in South Korea, my friend? He wins 5,000 meters gold medal in one of the most, I've spoken about it over and over because you know what? It's the only time we won gold medal in 5,000 Olympics. So it's like a Cleveland. They've only won it once in basketball. So you can talk about that every time, right? You know whom I'm talking about. So when Kenya wins 5,000 in Seoul, 5,000 and gold medal, and it's John Ngugi, we have to talk about it. It was one of those races when you watch, you realize not only this guy has the physicality, he has the mental capacity. Because the race starts and John Ngugi is just walking in the back. Literally, you can watch in the video. John Ngugi is just coming in the back. He's like, then he takes a lead in the beginning. Then he goes back again. Then he comes back again. He's almost like, I'm letting you guys know I'm still here. And then I think at the 3,000 K or 3,000 meters, John Ngugi takes the field in the he goes the front and ran 2 laps, 58 seconds. When he did that, the competition was completely disseminated. He had a 200-meter lead gap because people are like, oh no, that's John Ngugi. In fact, there's one thing he said about that race that was very dark to me. People are mocking him because they said, in fact, even commentators, I don't know if it's commentators, but there was a little bit of strange narrative about it, but he was naive. That's what, in fact, he says that a friend of his says, oh, you do that in the bushes. Okay, so like I say, he put a 200-meter lead in 5,000 and so 5,000 meters final. People are like, oh, we'll catch up with him later. They keep chasing. The gap still stays the same. I think it was between 200 meters and 100, maybe 100. It kept shrinking, and then sometimes you see it. John Ngugi says in that race, it was a mental game for him more than physical. Because one thing he confesses is that he knew his weakness. His weakness was that if it comes down to the sprint, John Ngugi had none. In fact, to this day, he knows. He's talked about it in an interview. So he said, I knew I didn't have that sprinting leg. He didn't have what I call Kenenisa Bekele sprint or Faith Kipyegon killer punch at the end. He doesn't have that. He doesn't have that. So he knew that inside in races it's done. So for him, you have to destroy the competition as soon as you can. Put them in their place and hopefully they don't close down on you, which he did. There's a Portuguese guy, oh God, rest his soul in peace. I hope he's still here. These guys start to chase Ngugi in some laps of trying to close the gap between him and the rest of the field and John Ngugi. And then, so he's isolated. He's in the middle. There's a big gap here of huge group of runners. John Ngugi is here. This guy's in an island by himself, but he's still chasing John Ngugi. But he's not closing the gap as quick as he's supposed to. He pays a big price at the end because not only does he not medal, he comes fourth and nobody could console the Portuguese guy at the end of the race. He was crying like a baby profusely. I've watched that race and sometimes you're like, oh my God, what was he thinking and what happened? So that's what happened. John Ngugi wins gold medal in 88 Olympics, 5,000 meters. The only gold we won as a country of Kenya. And the last one, John Ngugi Kamau. After that, he goes back to 89 and wins another cross country. Five world cross country champ, 1 gold medal in 5,000 or so. And so you think, well, he's in his prime. Things are great. Here comes what I call the scandals of scandals. I think this back then they were trying to crack down on doping people. The IAAF has started sending some agents around different countries and sometimes Kenya, where they are trying to test athletes who maybe have used drugs. So you can be tested and then your sample is taken to Zurich and they do other testing and it's come negative, you're good. But they do this in a way that they call it off competition, off season, they can just test you randomly. So at one point they came to John Ngugi and they could not find him 3 times, they say. I don't know, but that's the allegation. And so when you miss 3 strikes in doping test that they couldn't find you, they become suspicious and they ban you automatically for 4 years. So he was banned for 4 years. That was the penalty for him missing those testing. And so John Ngugi has to go to wilderness. He's in the cold. The country turns back on him, which is very strange by itself, but that's Kenya for you, my friend. The Athletic Kenya Association pretty much left him to hang. There was no rally around this hero. He has to fight for his reputation, his glory, his chance to compete in the next thing, because when you're banned, you cannot compete. He spends a lot of money. It was all over. I don't think it was even in the news. We dig these stories later, how much this guy was really humiliated, embarrassed, and how he suffered in the cold. The Kenyan Athletic Association, to be honest with you, does not represent athletes. It never has. You can hear of scandals in Brazil. You can hear of scandals of these guys just flying out to these Olympics, and all they do is stick up ice cream up, what part of their body, and just snooze. They have no interest in athletes. It's about them. And that's where John Ngugi finds a vacuum and is left to hang. He's left to dry, so to speak. And he talks of that struggle that really took a toll on him. In fact, at one point, fortunately, he had an agent in John Bycott, who was a British agent who was very pro-athletes. Unlike Kim McDonald, whom I talked about in one of my episodes, who was he was just corrupt. I'll leave it at that. He went to bed with the Kenya 3As. They call him Kenya 3As, Kenya, Athletic Association. He went to bed with them all the time because he bribed them so he could have athletes he wanted. He could have a free hand on whatever Kenya was doing and the athletes. But John Bycott was very pro-athletes. He had Nixon Kiprotich, I remember, Matthew Birir. He had John Ngugi. He was very pro-athlete. And he had a small group that he really cared for. And this agent tried to fight for him. He tried to tell the government to help him fight this dubious, this ban that was slapped on him that really derailed his career because he was still good. It took so long. They dragged their feet with it. And then I think John Bycott found a window or a soft spot in the IAAF where he appealed against the ban, and they took a time to hear him out. And once they heard him out, I think it was reversed. I think they dropped the charges. He was reinstated, but at a very high cost. It had cost him a lot of money. It had cost him a lot of fortune. And he tried to sue the government and sue the Athletic Association. And in Kenya, anything legal is illegal. Okay? I'm just telling you that what you think is legal is illegal because there's no legality. I rest my case. So that's John Ngugi. It's interesting that the only thing the military and the powers of that time could do to him is promote him because he had won so many races. Instead of fighting for his career and reputation, they just say you're a senior sergeant. Really? What about my athletic career and my blood and sweat and everything? I don't know. That's interesting. I just leave it at that. John Bycott, the agent, I'll mention him again. A pro athlete. He passed away 2 years ago. May he rest in peace. He fought for John Ngugi. John Ngugi was reinstated. He comes back from the dead. John Ngugi came back from the dead after all these allegations, after all these things that he has suffered. He came back, went to Boston, and won his 5th World Cross Country Championship in snow. I mean, you are a Kenyan. he raced in that. I remember, I think it was on TV. I was here in the US at that time, and I saw some highlights of the race. It was snow race, and he said it was his best race because he had a lot of demons in that race that he wanted just to squash, so to speak. If you don't know John Ngugi, check him out. He's a legend to me. And that's where, after that, John Ngugi, I think he felt that he had reached what I kept saying is Mount Horeb sometimes, whereby you reach at the top and you look around, you've been fighting, you're 5 times world champion, you have 1 gold medal in 5,000. Nobody else has done that in Kenya. And I think he started to see a decline. John Ngugi right now, I think he's a senior sergeant in the military. He retired, I think, a few years ago. John Ngugi Kamau speaks to me. I met this guy in 1989. I was in Nyayo Stadium there training. I've seen this guy like face to face. So I'm talking about people I've met. Very soft-spoken character. He doesn't say much, but you can see what he does. And so he has retired. I think he has a foundation that empowers young people, young generation, to be aware of doping and the scandals around it, and to be clean and work hard. John Ngugi Kamau. Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Guess what? Kenya is a great country when you have those two spoken of by Joel Chestnut. Episode 43. I salute those two guys, man, all day long. We need statues for them. They deserve it. They're heroes in my world.